So I'm Dawn.
I'm yourself.
Oh, I'm Elizabeth. Oh, Elizabeth.
I'm Carolina.
Okay, and we're doing Chapter 8, Assessment Results, Feedback Standards, Reference, Grading, and Reporting, A Bridge to Sustained Educational Equity. Contents of Chapter 8 are issues of grading, using student portfolios for assessment and grading, and reporting student progress in portfolio conferences. So where do grades fit in all of this? Black and Williams research on formative assessment states that grades are not as effective as feedback, and in some cases may even be counterproductive. Individualized comments tailored to each student seems to have more of a positive impact on their learning and improves achievement. Good feedback is at the heart of all good pedagogy, and quality feedback has critical importance in learning. So the book talks about the feedback process, where in step 1, you're attending to the individual student's performance. Step 2, you're praising the student's output against some reference, which is normally a standard of some sort. Identify the student's strengths and weaknesses. And then you're going to respond to the individual students and report on what you see. The feedback process is comparative. You're going to compare your students against standards. It reflects your judgment as the teacher, and this process results in teachers giving grades, measuring on a rubric, and giving written and verbal responses. The chapter takes the stance that grading is an inevitable part of life, but its negative and punitive effects on students have to be eliminated. The chapter highlights how standards, reference, feedback, grading, and reporting can reflect students' accomplishments and not their failures. So I have a Padlet question for you guys. Think of a time that that your grade didn't reflect your work or your knowledge. And then how could feedback have been more helpful to you than a grade in that situation? And give some ideas of better feedback than a grade. Go ahead and pause it if you need to. Okay, so how should we report grading and reporting? Or sorry, how should we approach reporting and grading? I can speak. Today, reporting feedback offers an opportunity for teachers and students to meaningfully interact and decide how to move forward together. It allows us to move away from grading as interpreting the assessment results, and the book suggests promoting equitable teaching and learning through assessment portfolios. So there's some major issues with grading. One is that it perpetuates inequity. Grading has an enormous influence on students' motivation to learn, especially students that have been historically underserved. And then also the normative feedback, that is when, it's feedback that is reflective of a student's performance in a reference to others in the class. It is still commonplace, and it can defeat the improvement of learning. When students realize that they are being judged against peers, they kind of take that as personal criticism. So in order to rethink grading, you're going to want to be improving accuracy, fairness, and consistency of grading opens the doors of equity in our classrooms. And then both teachers and students need to be focused on constructive feedback-based criteria for success. so that feedback pushes learning forward and becomes ingrained in class. So there's two camps in this situation. One is to not grade at all. So Alfie Kahn is opposed to grading for learning at all. And then there is like a team grades that Douglas Reeves believes that grading is a form of feedback for students. So teachers' expertise, teachers kind of get to be the mediator of this situation, and teachers bring expertise to instruction and assessment. They have expectations about what each student should be able to produce in response to the instructional assessment tasks. They use grade criteria and grade level standards. Academic language is used on expression and expression of content knowledge. Separate language proficiency achievement from other classroom expectations can also be used when grading. Some formative assessments for students that don't do well or do not test well are able to be used. And then activity may be open for assessment, but not all data needs to be graded. So setting learning goals to anchor grading practices, just as all students should be engaged in formative learning targets for each curricular unit, so should every student have individual learning goals. Content goals should be based on high academic standards, college and career readiness standards. Language goals should be based on language proficiency development standards. Depending on age and content and language goals can be determined by individual students from several models or models with consultation of peers or teachers, and the information from learning goals help determine the criteria for grading. Effort, motivation, and timeliness, these affective factors tend to take precedent over rigorous academic ones. So to determine what counts in grading, some examples of activities that generate data from assessment for learning are learning logs, notes from teachers, observation, oral questioning, think alouds, graphic organizers, and interactive journals. And here's Liz.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to talk about grading, giving grades to ELLs. The book mentions that ELLs have not reached academic equality in, for example, next to their English proficient peers. So due to increasing numbers of linguistically and culturally diverse students, especially our ELL students in classrooms, teachers need to be very careful to re-examine how they make judgments about students' performance and how they're going to grade them. So this can raise some questions for our educators. How can we grade? How can grades realistically convey what students are learning when their language they are in the middle of developing are often hidden through their academic accomplishments? So a question that I also had is, how can we better promote educational equality for our students? Well, we need to think about the factors that influence our grading and what we want to communicate to our students about their language learning. Next. Okay, so here's a scenario about grading our ELLs. So we have two students. Both of them are assigned grades due to their English as an additional language class. We have a student, Anna and Carlos. Both of them are in an intermediate EAL class in high school. So our ELLs are usually grouped according to their overall level of English language proficiency. Anna, you can see, attends class regularly. She is always on time, but she also is reluctant to participate in class activities. She completes few homework assignments, but is always attentive. She doesn't really like to participate in group work or discussions, but she also does fairly well in exams like her midterms and her finals. And then for our student Carlos, he misses several days due to his job because he often has to stay late. He sleeps in, but also Carlos puts in a lot of effort to participate in group work and class assignments. He tries to tackle his homework, but his weakness is sometimes big tests that are coming up, like his final exam. He can never seem to relate content using his new language. And then if you guys look at figure 8.1, this is how the teacher graded both these students. You can see that she used traditional gradings. This school is just barely starting the conversation about how we can switch from traditional grading to standards reference once to minimize subjectivity. So we can only see the components and not the criteria of these teachers grading these students. We see letters, but we don't see percentages, and we don't see how their language also contributes to these quizzes and classroom-based assessments. And as educators, our primary goal is to communicate our students' development of the language. Next slide, please. Okay. And then, so that's the dilemma that comes with grading ELLs. We have two students that have the same level of English language proficiency, but different stories. And so how are teachers expected to make sense of grading each unique student? At the end of the semester, Anna and Carlos teachers created final grades as seen in the rubric chart, and she kept giving traditional grading. But what do we do with ELLs that are newly arrived to the United States or to the class, or those who are ready to transition to the general classroom? How about the students who are level 2 or level 5 students, or are limited or interrupted in their education? And we also have students who are struggling with their academic language and also have learning disabilities. So should language development be graded? I did have a question for all of you guys. How would you grade students who were newly arrived in the United States according to their English language proficiency? And then you guys can stop this question and answer in the Padlet. Okay. Yeah. And here's the question. Okay. And then just some things to consider. If we are able to modify instruction and classroom assessment for our ELLs, how come we don't extend it to our grading? So let's say that we have a student with limited formal schooling. We can't be expected to move, that the student will be moving at the pace that an ELL with strong skills and solid education foundation has. So that's what some issues are seeing in grading our students because of the structure and content grading. Having grades that only show letters and numbers, we should have grading be a descriptors of our students and what they fall in particular to their language development. Also, it lacks validity in grading content. And then some of the things that the book mentions for evaluating our students is using different sources like student self-assessments. And then also as the student gets older, the greater the responsibility for them to learn on their own increases. So we have to keep that in mind. We also can do learning through tasks and projects and having rubrics shared with criteria for our students, and then teacher-made tests. And I think that is all for me.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the criteria for grading in a standards reference world. So there are 4 different types of criteria that the text mentioned. The first one is product criteria. So this is used to communicate what students have achieved over either just one unit of learning or more than one. And this is focusing on what the students have actually produced. So whether that's an actual product whether it's a debate they did, a drama, a reenactment, a final project, maybe it's a report they wrote, an exhibit or a presentation. You're focusing on what they have produced. Process criteria is the next one. This is looking more into the students' responsibilities, their efforts, or their work habits. So this may include like classroom quizzes, homework, how quick they turn an assignment, was the assignment late, how much are participating in the classroom, if they're here or if they're not here on regularly. The next one is progress criteria. So this one measures how much students have gained from learning experiences, and this helps to show you how they have academically grown. And then the other one is performance criteria. This one's really important for ELLs because it's taken into account their proficiency levels as a starting point for you to be able to measure their growth. Next slide. So this is a report card for dual language learners. The text was mentioning how grades for ELLs and any other students who are language learners need to not only be reflective of their language proficiency, but also their academic achievement. So this figure here, figure 8.3, is an example from the textbook that shows an example of this report card. So like you can see on one side it has academic achievement, and on the other side it has language development. And it also includes a column for English and a column for their whatever other language they speak. And then it's broken down into 4 different main subjects. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about can-do descriptors, and these were essentially described as task-based examples of what ELLs are able to do linguistically at a certain level of proficiency, and these are available by the WIDA in English and Spanish, and they present standards referenced classroom activities with a specific language focus. And the next slide will show an example of that. So this is the example that I took straight from the WIDA. These are can-do descriptors for grade 1 for the key use of explain. So the students are speaking, and one example I got from the first column said like explain by answering questions, or explain by describing, explain by telling why. So you can see that it's different things, but in all of them the students are speaking. Next slide. This next section is going to be about student portfolios for assessment and grading. These are helpful for teachers who have students who are either, maybe they're moving from one grade to the next grade. Maybe they're transferring schools within the school district. Maybe they're moving from language or academic support services, or maybe they're being considered for special ed, or maybe perhaps they're graduating elementary or high school, either one of those. Next slide. So the textbook talked about different features of assessment portfolios, but it's important that they're designed to capture ELL's language proficiency, but also their academic achievement through performance assessment. So it may include their learning through their L1 or through English, the interdependence between oral language and literacy development, the integration of language and content in their work, higher level thinking, multiliteracies, and any reflections or self-assessment that the students themselves have done. So it's important that these portfolios are a reflection of the students, who they are, what they can do, and how they can show what they have learned. Next slide. So some of the contents of assessment portfolios, it can vary. They're not always going to be the same in like what's chosen to include in the portfolio. Sometimes the students may have choice for what can go inside of it. Other times it can be both the teacher and the student, and together they can decide and talk about what they should include in that portfolio. Sometimes it's just the teacher deciding what the student needs to put in it. Other times it's made from a district-wide choice with a set list of what needs to go in each student's portfolio. Next slide. So this is our next Padlet question. It's question 3, and it says, have you ever completed an assessment portfolio or seen one integrated into the classroom? If you have, explain what it looked like, and if you haven't, would you consider using assessment portfolios? Why or why not? So you can go ahead and pause that if you need to. Next slide. So some examples of assessment portfolio entries. This can be a dated student summary sheet. So maybe this includes a little bit about the student, the teacher, and the student goals, so both of those, college and career readiness standards, and also language proficiency development standards. It can also include a student introduction with their purpose and their audience, original samples of their own work, and then entries that maybe show their multiliteracies, any quizzes or tests that the student has taken, along with peer and student self-assessment or reflections directly from the student. Next slide. These were some ideas mentioned in the text for multimedia entries for assessment portfolios. They can really be like a wide range of things. It can be digital or scanned writing samples or scanned pieces of creative work, presentations like PowerPoints, Prezis, or any other sort of multimedia presentation. It can be photos from student-created models or exhibits, photos or panoramic videos of any artistic renderings the student has created, videos of the students doing a reenactment or a drama or any other student interactions, any audio recordings of oral language from the student, any videos that the student made themselves, along with any evidence that the student used some sort of computer software programs. Maybe they created a code or designed something else using the computer software program. And I think that's it for me.
All right, so I'm going to start my section off with a question. And the question for it is, what do you think is the best way to conference with parents and students? All right. And then reporting student progress and portfolio conferences. Assessment portfolios are the perfect venue for students to showcase their newly acquired language and knowledge and share their accomplishments with others. And these can be arranged at the close of a marking period to organize the contents review of the entries, insert common goals for the coming months. And that way the grades are ultimately assigned for a personal meeting to the students and their family members. And the teacher should have a management plan for portfolios that will address their quantity, quality, timing, and presentation. And then you can also have the student design a table of contents. Okay, and then for teacher-student conferences, a conference should strengthen individualized instruction afterward. Teachers can complete a summary sheet to the supplement of the student report cards for ELL standards. And there's a space for a short narrative based on the evidence of learning. And some questions you can ask to prepare for the conference are, what is your best work? What did you learn from doing this project? Which one are you the most proud of? And what grade do you think you should get? What was the goal you're working on? And what goal should we work on next? Have your goals for this marking period improved? And show me a piece from the beginning of the year and the one you just finished and to compare them. Okay, and then graduation portfolios and the seal of biliteracy. So for high school graduation portfolios, they were included in the state of Kentucky and Vermont in the early 1990s to have more of a comprehensive portrait of students' accomplishments than a score on a single high-stakes test. And today, these graduation portfolios are re-emerging as a mark of college and career readiness. Seniors can defend their work in front of a panel of judges, generally consisting of a school administrator, counselor, teacher, and former student. Submitting portfolios to an online third party is a recent attempt on the part of some school districts to take on the subjectivity of the evaluation progress. Another trend at the high school level has been the recognition of English and additional languages for the seal of biliteracy on the high school diploma of language learners. It is intended to promote social and economic advancement within our interconnected international marketplace. Okay, and then for a final reaction and reflection, it has been challenging in the past to assign grades to ELL students as English language proficiency may prevent them from assessing grade level content and demonstrating their true content knowledge. In recent years, standards have provided teachers guidance in identifying learning targets for their units and objectives or their lessons, deciding on how to measure these targets and objectives and translating these results into grades. Okay, then this is our source for our PowerPoint.